When we watch global conflicts unfold on the news, it's almost always framed around ideology or territory. But today's explainer unpacks a fascinating and honestly highly controversial theory from geopolitical analysts. What if these massive global disruptions are actually calculated macroeconomic strategies? A growing body of analysis is taking a hard look at the hidden ledger behind these conflicts, exploring the idea that major global disruptions are actually part of a very deliberate economic blueprint. So I want you to keep this question in the back of your mind as we go through this. How exactly does a country win economically by fighting wars overseas? According to the analysts we're looking at today, the secret isn't just about, immediate military victory. It's actually about cornering the global energy supply. The idea is that by fighting wars on other people's turfs, a superpower implicitly wins by shielding its own industrial base while simultaneously taking over global markets. It is definitely a complex and debated lens through which to view modern conflict. Okay, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the macroeconomic war theory, look at the Ukraine LNG blueprint, discuss the strategy of seizing Harg Island, examine the AI energy race, and finally end with the global economic ripple effects. All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, Macroeconomic War Theory. So the core of this theory suggests that by cornering the global energy market, a superpower can actually reinforce its financial dominance. Think about it like this. As the world transitions and these new multipolar alliances form, analysts suggest that manufacturing market conditions where global energy flow is disrupted literally forces allied nations to abandon their cheaper energy alternatives. And the result? Well, they have to turn to American liquefied natural gas, or LNG. And crucially, they have to purchase it in dollars, essentially creating a petrogas dollar that heavily bolsters the U.S. economy. And wow, just look at the stakes here. Global oil and gas companies raked in over $900 billion in profits in 2022. That's during massive geopolitical instability. While everyday citizens are facing inflation and soaring gas prices at the pump, the overarching strategy results in a massive wealth transfer. It really highlights how, from a macroeconomic perspective, conflict zones are highly profitable arenas for whoever controls the alternative energy supplies. Moving right along to Section 2, the Ukraine LNG blueprint. To understand this, we have to look at Europe. According to the sources, the destruction of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline successfully cut off Russian gas to Germany. This created a massive vacuum, right? And that vacuum was quickly filled by U.S. energy companies. Before the conflict, Europe, and specifically its main economic engine, Germany, relied on highly affordable energy piped directly from Russia. Once those lines were physically cut, Europe was forced to pivot dramatically to American LNG, which is of course significantly more expensive to extract, process, and then ship all the way across the ocean. To put that into perspective, by exploiting these sudden supply gaps, U.S. oil and gas corporations were estimated to make up to $126 billion in extra windfall profits in a single year. Literally just by removing the competition, the market was cornered. Analysts point out that this effectively shifts wealth right out of European economies and straight into the pockets of alternative energy providers. But here's where it gets really interesting. Analysts note that this energy monopoly doesn't just reap direct profits, it indirectly deindustrializes Europe. When energy becomes prohibitively expensive, manufacturing simply cannot survive. So, what happens? Massive multinational companies like Siemens and BMW pack up and move their factories to the United States, where energy is subsidized and much cheaper. It's essentially transferring Europe's industrial strength across the Atlantic. Now let's take that framework and apply it to Section 3, seizing Harg Island. Analysts point out that U.S. planners and Israel have weighed the strategy of actually seizing Harg Island. Now, this is a really bold move. We're talking about physically controlling Iran's energy infrastructure rather than just, bombing it from the air. By targeting this tiny island, which acts as the beating heart of Iran's oil industry, the aim would be to completely choke off the regime's economic lifeline. Taking the island and the oil would theoretically neutralize a long-term security threat by entirely defunding proxy groups in the region. Now, while actually seizing the island and taking the oil could definitely defund Iran and secure U.S. negotiation leverage, experts warn it is a massive trap. This kind of ground operation could send global energy prices absolutely spiraling and put troops in extreme danger. Military analysts point out that holding a heavily fortified island requires a massive, highly vulnerable ground operation. And on top of that, it risks immediate retaliation, potentially halting all traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, which would plunge the global economy into chaos.
So, if we compare the two, the theoretical goal across both regions remains exactly the same: eliminate the competition so you can dominate global energy. By isolating major players from the market, you don't just win a military victory. You force the entire globe into a dependency loop on your own exports. It goes right back to reinforcing that petrogas dollar we discussed earlier.
But of course, actions have consequences. Let's look at Section 4, the AI energy race. The Gulf states were pledging literal trillions to fund the American AI boom. But with the Strait of Hormuz disrupted and their oil revenues dropping, these massive tech investments are now severely at risk. And here is the ultimate irony of this whole situation. Defensive military strategies could end up bankrupting the very sovereign wealth funds that Silicon Valley relies on, especially as their GDPs face projected declines from maritime disruptions. Okay, so why does this actually matter locally? Well, without that Gulf infrastructure, the U.S. has to build AI data centers right at home. And that leads to immense strain on local power grids and water supplies, which is understandably causing intense community resistance. These AI data centers consume staggering amounts of electricity and water for cooling. I mean, we are talking about draining enough water to shrink the Great Lakes by 4 feet. As local projects get blocked, amounting to billions of dollars in stalled developments, the tech industry desperately needs the cheap energy and desalinated water that the Middle East provides. Basically, disrupting the Middle East disrupts the future of AI.
And get this, here is another incredible irony. While the US risks destabilizing the Middle East to control fossil fuels, its primary rival, China, is rapidly pivoting away from them. China has been anticipating this exact energy chokehold. By securing massive uranium deposits and transitioning heavily to nuclear power, they are immunizing themselves against naval blockades. This puts them in a highly competitive, self-reliant position in the global technological arms race.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, Global Economic Ripple Effects. This whole situation creates a pretty brutal domino effect. Natural gas is actually required to make nitrogen fertilizer. So when war spikes gas prices, it directly leads to soaring food costs at your local grocery store. It's estimated that half of all global food production relies on synthetic nitrogen fertilizers like urea. With shipping disrupted, the cost of farming just skyrockets, which historically is a massive driver for immense social unrest and political instability. And it goes way beyond just food. A blockade on the Gulf chokes off Qatar's helium supply, which, believe it or not, is completely irreplaceable for manufacturing semiconductor chips and keeping hospital MRI machines running. You literally can't safely transport large amounts of helium by air. It has to go by sea. So everything is connected. A naval blockade halfway around the world suddenly means tech companies can't make microchips, and your local hospital can't even scan patients. Because of all this, some journalists actually describe this as a pirate strategy. It's where a superpower uses naval blockades to harass global trade and energy from a distance, remaining totally shielded from the worst of the economic fallout. Instead of holding vulnerable ground bases, the idea is to park fleets near essential choke points, dictating who can and cannot trade, effectively controlling the world's economy through the constant threat of remote destruction. Which leads us with this final thought for today's explainer. In a deeply interconnected world, can you truly win an economic war? Or do the ripples eventually capsize everyone's ship? By aggressively pursuing these macroeconomic strategies, nations might reap billions in the short term, for sure. But they risk bankrupting allies, accelerating the rise of their rivals, and seriously inflating the cost of living for their own citizens. It's an unbelievably high-stakes gamble on the world stage. And we are all living through the consequences.